having a carpeted bathroom, then you probably didn't share in that abundance. The
didn't share
your job inexplicably having a carpeted bathroom, then you probably didn't share in that.
これ何分ぐらいやります？
もうすぐ終わる。
That abundance. The 80s saw rise.
Rising economic inequality 労働者と金持ちの不平等ね。
Rising economic inequality, although not nearly as dramatic as we see today. By the mid-1990s, the
これはだからレーガンの後のこと言ってるのね。
richest 1%
1% は 40%。
controlled 40% of the nation's wealth, double the share from 20 years before.
だから1970年代の2倍。
Meanwhile, the income of middle class
停滞スタグネートね。だからまずボトムラインの貧しい 20%。
families stagnated, and that of the poorest 20% began to decline. And
だからデクラインね。
one often overlooked aspect of deregulation was the closing of hospitals for the mentally ill. Now, some of these institutions were hellish, but rapid closure of all of these facilities without replacement services meant that many patients were left to live on the street.
なんかこうそういうここではだから患者ね閉鎖されたんで。
replacement services meant that many patients were left to live on the street. Homelessness increased dramatically. Now, of course, Reagan is considered the darling of
結局レーガンのやった政策によって貧しい人とか生活に困った人がさらに貧しくなったって彼言ってるのね。
conservatives today, but by current standards, he was something of a moderate. I mean, yes, he cut taxes of conservatives today, but by current standards, he was something of a moderate. I mean, yes, he cut taxes and he cut funding for programs that help the poor, like food stamps and school lunches. But during his
まあだからフードスタンプとかスクールランチとかね彼やったんだけど。
second term, he worked effectively with the Democratic Congress. There's no bipartisanship today.
Bipartisanship 二党政治ね。
Okay. Also, he left.
だからレフトっていうのはニューディールから離れてっていうね。それからグロースソサイティプログラムは結局社会保険制度っていうものに対しては彼はタッチしなかった。
The big New Deal and Great Society programs largely intact. I mean, he was too old.
Medicare って65歳以上老人の健康保険制度ね。
Old to believe in cutting Medicare. He was like, all of my friends are on this. And the 80s. He also didn't see the fulfillment of the desires of the Christian right. I mean, divorce rates went up, abortion continued to be legal. Women didn't leave the workforce. In fact, Reagan appointed the first woman to the Supreme Court. Are you kidding? We didn't have a woman in the Supreme Court until the 1980s? This is the craziest country ever. Even affirmative action persisted, and Nancy Reagan's urging of Americans to just say no to drugs didn't convince anybody. And then we have Ronald Reagan's reputation as the man who ended the Cold War. The thing
彼は冷戦を
Here goes that Reagan spent so much money on defense that the Soviets bankrupted themselves trying to compete. And there may be a case
結局ロシアがそれに対抗ソビエトが対抗できなかった
to be made there, but we don't want to remove agency from the people who protested the oppression of life behind the Iron Curtain. So while you can argue that the Reagan administration helped create good conditions for the change that happened, the people who made the change made it. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. In his first term, Ronald Reagan took a really hard line against the Soviet Union. He called it an evil empire and even once joked that the U.S. would begin bombing in 5 minutes. That was ill-advised.
ジョークで言ったんですよね
Reagan also sponsored the largest military buildup in U.S. history, including the MX missile. The highlight was his proposed Strategic Defense Initiative, aka Star Wars, space-based missiles and lasers for shooting Soviet missiles out of the sky. This was a fantastic idea, although it would have violated the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, but anyway, it was technologically impossible to build. The force was not strong with this idea. Reagan also pressured NATO to put missiles in Western Europe, and the war games that NATO staged in 1983 were so realistic that the Soviets almost scrambled their planes and launched ICBMs. Now, if that had resulted in a nuclear war, we'd have a very different story on our hands, but it didn't. And Reagan's aggressive nuclear posturing had a couple of positive results. First, it boosted the worldwide anti-nuclear weapons movement called the Freeze movement, and second, it turned Reagan into the most successful nuclear abolitionist in the atomic age. There's nothing like a reasonably close brush with nuclear apocalypse to
アポカリプスはこの世の終わりですね
tone down your rhetoric a little, and in his second term, Reagan was much more conciliatory toward the Soviets and worked
まあだからセカンドタームになるとこのコンシリアタリー中和的になってソフトになって初めハードだ2期目はソフトに
to reduce the number of warheads. In his first term, according to the historian Victor Sebastian, Reagan spent nearly as much on defense as Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter combined.
だからこの歴代の大統領を合わせたぐらいの軍事費を使ったんですよね
and much more than both the cost of the Korean and Vietnam War.
だからコリアとビエトナム以上の金を使った
But in his second term, Reagan toned down both the spending and his rhetoric, declaring our constant and urgent purpose must be a lasting reduction of
リダクションですねこの
tensions between us. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So Reagan was able to negotiate the first reduction in nuclear weapons with the new Soviet premier Mikhail Gorbachev
ゴルバチョフ
in 1986. In fact, the two leaders might have tried to get rid of nuclear weapons altogether, but Reagan's unwillingness to give up his Star Wars initiative
まあただ彼はwillingness to give up his Star Wars initiative ね
made that impossible. That was a big deal, but the rest of Reagan's foreign policy was somewhat less triumphant. For instance, he sent
レバノンねピースキーピングミッションこれうまくいかなかった
Marines to Lebanon as part of a peacekeeping mission, but then withdrew forces after 241 of them were killed by a car bomb. And Middle Eastern policy played a key role in the biggest controversy of Reagan's presidency, the Iran-Contra scandal. This was
これイランコントラですね
truly one of the craziest schemes ever hatched up by an American presidential administration, which is really saying something. The Contras were
サンディニスタってニカラグアの有名な反政府軍、じゃなくて政府軍社会主義ね、ソーシャリストサンディニスタガバメントを転覆させるためにアメリカ政府はコントラを支援したんですね。